Hi, I'm Steve Adubato, coming to you from the Tisch WNET studio in the heart of New York City. Lincoln Center. It is our honor to welcome one of the giants in our industry. John Avlon is a senior political analyst at CNN. You see him on New Day every day doing reality check when there's not a lot of reality to go around. And also the author of the book, Washington's Farewell, the Founding Fathers' Warning to Future Generations. John, good to see you.
Good to see you, Steve. Thank you.
What time are you up in the morning to do?
Oh, God. Get up around 4:15. You know, roll in the studio a little after 5.
Describe New Day for folks.
It's CNN's morning show. It's, Ali Camerata and John Berman are the anchors, and it's a sort of smart, substantive, hopefully I think it's younger and funnier than a lot of the competition, but it's rooted in real reporting, which is one of CNN's great assets. You know, it's not just an opinion show. We'll get some salt and pepper in there, but it's about the substance. It's about fact first.
So let's be clear, folks. We always are upfront about when we're taping, even though we think we're evergreen. We're not a news program. We're an analysis program. We're taping mid-May 2019. The constitutional crisis issue. This airs 2 months from now. Will there still be a, quote, constitutional crisis?
God, I hope not. I mean, it does seem to be sort of a rolling disaster of a situation we're in with regard to a president who is not constrained by precedent. The situation we're dealing with right now is really just goes to the heart of questions of checks and balances, Congress's ability to provide oversight to the president, whether the administration will respect subpoenas, and instead we've seen a sort of a Stonewall strategy. I think it's about suing for time as much as anything else. The president's hoping that the courts will pick up these cases. They'll have to.
Why?
The tiebreaker.
Why is that to his advantage if the, quote, courts pick it up, the third branch of government, the executive, the congressional branch, and why is the judicial branch to his
Because they're
advantage?
so slow, it might move these things out until after the next election. That's
What?
Yeah. Look, I mean,
So what
some of
happens
these cases,
then?
well,
Nothing?
In that case, there will be incomplete information given to the Congress and by proxy to the American people about the things that the president's trying to keep concealed. Look, fights over executive privilege have gone on since the days of Washington, Jefferson. This is not new per se.
Is it different?
What's different is it's the blanket application of executive privilege. And to show you how, I think, reflexive it is, and therefore I think what a difficult time they'll ultimately have in the courts, if you're trying to put blanket provision of executive privilege on the entire Mueller report, well, half the Mueller report concerns things that occurred before he was president. You know, executive privilege doesn't apply, folks, to what happened during the campaign. So I think it's about the president's impulse to obstruct, his frustration with the process of oversight and accountability. So he's taken what's a classic tension. And look, our system's based on tensions between the president, Congress, president, and the press. But he's essentially gone nuclear, I think, in as much as anything, a fit of personal frustration.
So the president tweets all hours, continues to do that.
Yeah.
Talk about evergreen. I don't expect that to change anytime soon.
No, that's not going to change.
To what degree do you see John, not just as someone in the media who's an analyst, but someone who tries to break things down on reality check every morning on a new day? To what extent is the president driving the agenda for the media as opposed to those of us in the media, whether on the public side? And by the way, we should disclose that John's wife, Margaret Hoover, is the anchor of Firing Line every weekend here on PBS.
My far better half.
She was great. She was also, check her out on our website. You can see that broadcast. But whether you're on the public side or the commercial side, to what extent should we in the media be saying, all right, the president tweeted that. He tweeted something else. It may or may not be true, often not. We decide what should be spoken about as opposed to he tweets, we respond.
Yeah, look, I think it's important to not simply be reactive. That said, news is what's new. And he's the president of the United States. You can't ignore the president. What you can do is show judgment. But there's a slippery slope with regard to normalization. Let's just take the question of the president saying something that's not true, whether it's a lie or falsehood or and you can parse those things. Lie usually involves intent. Washington Post, for example, says he's clearing in on 10,000. That's a land speed record, people.
10,000
lies or mistruths through the course of his term to date. If we stop calling those out, because we say, look, everybody knows the president doesn't have much fidelity to facts, we effectively normalize it. So the key, I think, is to be able to walk and chew gum. You're going to be reactive to some extent. He's the president of the United States. It's our job as journalists to make important stories interesting. And that means the tail can't always walk the dog. We need to make sure we're focusing on the things with a sense of the broader horizon and not just being reactive to the sort of radioactive squirrels that run around us and distract us in the short term, because sometimes that distraction can be a technique to manipulate press coverage in upon itself.
To what extent does the coverage on cable news, and I'm not going to lump CNN, MSNBC, Fox, everyone together.
I appreciate that.
Okay. Our folks who come in from the other networks say the same thing. To what extent are we driven by the quote-unquote the horse race with 20 Democratic candidates for president going to 2020, the president clearly running for re-election? To what extent is the horse race driving it versus substantive issues, regardless of who the candidates are, but the issues that affect the American people?
Look, there's always a marriage between personality and policy. I do think, though, that we get distracted by horse races that don't have anything to do with outcomes, let alone what they're proposing to the American people.
Because?
Well, I think because you get a new poll, it's a bright, shiny object. It gives you a sense of what's happening right now. It's a sense. It's a snapshot in time. It's better than depending on, visceral, here's what I see on Twitter, per se. But I think one of the mistakes that was made in the 2016 coverage, there was, for example, too much focus on national polls, not enough on local that will determine the electoral outcome. I think it's incumbent upon us to talk about policy, though. And if you talk to folks, they care about the policies that affect their own lives. And again, this falls into the bucket of it's our job as journalists to make the important stories interesting. And that's one of the things I try to do on Reality Check. We've been doing deep dives into policy proposals by the candidates.
Such as, give folks a sense of it.
Cory Booker's gun proposal, just this past week in the wake of, we've had 15 school shootings in 2019. We've had 243 school shootings, not including colleges, since Columbine 20 years ago. So this is something that affects people. And again, talk about not giving into normalization. It's not normal for kids to fear being shot up by other kids in school. That's why government exists. Now, you can do things consistent with the Second Amendment. We can have great debates about it. We can have great debates about the way folks in urban and rural communities have a different relationship with guns. But we should also talk about the policies that are being put forward. We should talk about proposals about, free college proposals being proposed by some Democrats and what it will cost, because there actually isn't anything
what has to be given up in order to do that?
The trade-offs.
And who winds up paying for it?
Exactly. And that's key.
Let me push back. I'm sorry for interrupting.
Sure, no, not at all.
Someone says, or people say, well, why don't you just give people what they want? Why don't we just figure out what people want us to talk about and talk about that, as opposed to, I know it's not black and white, as opposed to, we think you need to try to understand this because it affects our lives, or if not your life, those around us and our overall society, even if, quote, you're not interested in it.
Look, there's a balance.
Or is that our job on PBS?
Look, if you get a tote bag, then I think.
Okay, I knew the tote bag was coming up.
First of all, thank God for PBS in all seriousness, because there needs to be a place where people can go and get quality programming and educational coverage that's not necessarily being covered every place else. The danger, if you look at the history of democracies, the history of humanity, the danger is that coverage left to its own devices will move towards bread and circuses. It will move towards, which is the old Roman phrase for things that can distract people and keep their eye off the ball of being an active citizen of a real republic. And that's not a spectator sport. You got to get involved. But George Washington always pointed out, enlightened opinion is necessary to a self-governing society. Enlightened opinion. And that's part of our job as citizens and journalists. But it's really part of what journalist charter is, and why the Constitution doesn't mention political parties. It does mention journalists.
It does not mention parties.
It does not mention political parties.
Put this in context. Washington's farewell, the Founding Fathers' warning to future generations, written what year?
It was written over 4 years, and it came out in January of 2017, on the day, actually, of Obama's farewell address.
Why is it still relevant, or more relevant today than ever before? Washington's farewell.
This is a prophetic document. It was the most famous speech in American history in the early days of the Republic for the first 100 years, more widely reprinted than the Declaration of Independence. It was civic scripture. And what Washington did, basically, is he laid out warnings about the forces he feared could destroy our democratic republic. And wait for it.
Such as?
Top three: hyperpartisanship, excessive debt, and foreign wars and foreign influence in our domestic debates and elections. So it just goes to show you one of the reasons why it is so important to study history, because history keeps repeating, and we can either be ready for it and a little bit wiser. And I think when we ignore things like the warnings from the Founding Fathers, we do ourselves a real disservice, because we don't see challenges coming that cut to the heart of who we are. We've got to hand this society better to the next generation. That's our job as citizens. And we can't do it if we're cut off from our history. It's about enlightened opinion being necessary to a self-governing society.
One more follow-up question. Yeah. If the president continues, which you may well do, call a whole range of what you do, what we do, and what others do in the media, quote, fake news, what concerns, if any, do you have, John, about the long-term impact of that on our overall society, and also how most folks view what we do and why we do it.
We got to push back on that unapologetically, because it cuts to the heart of what it means to be a republic. We have independent institutions, the press, the judiciary, law enforcement, that keep everything held together in our society. And if we start buying into a phrase that is designed to discredit facts, this isn't in an era of partisan media that's aided it, that becomes really dangerous existentially for the republic. So we got to insist unapologetically on a fact-based debate. We cannot be, Ed Murrow once said, we will not be led by fear into an age of unreason. That's basic. And we can straighten our civic backbones and say that real clear-eyed. There are efforts in disinformation efforts that circulate on social media like never before, but they're old playbooks. They're old playbooks designed to confuse people, to muddy the waters between fact and fiction. So there is a real, clear and present danger from it, and an obligation we have to step in and stop it.
I lied. I got another minute. At home, conversation between you and your wife, Margaret Hoover, right here on PBS, Firing Line. Check it out on the weekends. Talk a lot about politics and media, or not?
No, we talk probably about politics and media more than the average household, but who we are in private is who we are in public. I mean, we're both affectionate people. We've got two beautiful kids that are just magic, 5 and 3.
Wow.
And all as all parents will know, all the it's magic stuff, and all the mysteries of the universe are revealed when you have kids. She makes my tail wag. She's a wonderful, bright and beautiful in every way person.
I don't think any husband could ever say it any better. John, thank you. John Avlon, you can check him out. A New Day, Reality Check every morning. Also, he's an author. Check out Washington's Farewell. Thank you for joining us here on the PBS
Anytime.
family, even though you're part of it. Okay?
Extended.
This is One-on-One. We're at the WNET Tisch studio. We'll be right back right after this.
One-on-One with Steve Adubato has been a production of the Caucus Educational Corporation, celebrating over 30 years of broadcast excellence. This special edition of One-on-One with Steve Adubato is brought to you from the Tisch WNET studios at Lincoln Center. Funding has been provided by the law firm of Gibbons PC, the Northward Center, Horizon Blue Cross Blue Shield of New Jersey, TD Bank, Johnson & Johnson, St. Joseph's Health, and by Georgian Court University. Transportation provided by Airbrook Limousine, serving the metropolitan New York, New Jersey area.